Good afternoon, everyone, and a very, very warm welcome to today's very important but a very urgent discussion on empowering women through climate change. My name is Karishma Ali, and I am your moderator for today's session. I am a proud member of the UN Women Asia 30 for 2030 as a gender activist and a gender equality activist. Coming from Chitral, a beautiful but a deeply vulnerable region in the north of Pakistan, I have witnessed firsthand the impact, of climate change on my community. We heavily rely on natural resources, but we're surrounded by these massive, massive glaciers that are melting at an alarming rate, causing catastrophic floods, the loss of livelihood, and displacement within my communities. And we don't take note of this, but women and young girls in our community are particularly vulnerable to these situations. They do bear the situation, but they are also they don't have enough resources to adapt to these changes. We also must not forget that women and young girls are actually agents of change in the fight of climate change. And in today's discussion, we're going to be discussing on the innovative way, the way we can empower women to fight against climate change. And we're going to be discussing about the untapped potential of gender-sensitive climate action and the innovative way forward. Right now, we're going to start with a short video from UN Women that's going to play, and then we are going to then have one video from our keynote speaker from India who could not join us for this session. And then I'm going to be introducing the panelists and, of course, our chair for today's session. If you could please play the video.
Good afternoon, everybody. We have looked at various...
I'm just going to quickly introduce our keynote speaker. I'm so sorry I have not done that. But our keynote speaker for today, who has not been able to join us today, is Geetanjali Angumo, who is the co-founder, director, and dean of the Himalayan Institute of Alternatives, India.
Climate change, like political, social, economic, technological, and now we've come to perhaps one of the most important of them all, women, as important stakeholders of this climate change. So what can women do? To me, there are three important aspects that women can contribute towards both the adaptation and mitigation of climate change. The first, if we look at the Greek term ikos, which means from where eco is derived, it means an extended household. So eco is like an extended household. And just as women handle the household very carefully, they don't spend their resources today, but they keep it for tomorrow. They manage the resources in a way which is good for all. They are always thinking about the children, about tomorrow. In the same way, women have to work and assume leadership roles across various organizations in the world that are working in climate change, because they naturally bring an approach which is holistic and integral and which is far-sighted. Secondly, in the rural and other communities which get impacted by climate change, it is women and children who are first affected. And this can become a positive because we know, and that necessity is the mother of all invention, that innovation comes from lived experience. So if women are educated and empowered in these communities, then they will find very innovative solutions as they combat climate change, as they are the first who suffer the impacts of this. And finally, it is said that a woman, when is educated, the whole village is educated. So women can play an important role in the way they bring up the next generation, because policy is one end of the solution, behavioral change is the other end. And this behavioral change can be imbibed from the mother during childhood. And that's how, be it leadership in the largest organizations, be it in grassroots innovation, or be it in bringing up the next generation, women are a very important stakeholder. And unless we bring them into the fold of this discussion, I don't think this discussion can be complete or can even achieve any fruition. Thank you.
Now, I'm going to go straight into introducing today's panel's chairperson, who is Jane Marriott, Excellency Jane Marriott, the British High Commissioner to Pakistan. If I could please request you to come and give a keynote.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And I know that straight after lunch, my key job is to be interesting enough that you don't all fall asleep. But I think that the fact that you are here and in this room today means that you know that what we're talking about really matters. And I have to say, when I was first exposed to some of these issues many years ago, and someone said, climate is a gender issue, I'm like, what do you mean climate's a gender issue? If there's a flood, men and women die, children die, it doesn't go, let's kill the women first. So it took me a while to realise that what we were actually talking about is that climate change is not gender neutral. Now, this doesn't mean that it doesn't impact men, but what it does mean is that it impacts women and children more severely for a bunch of structural reasons and underlying inequalities behind that. So this is something that we need to reflect and mainstream into our policy thinking and analysis. And I was really, really scared actually by some of these statistics. So the UN estimates that globally 80% of people who are displaced by climate change are women. That can't be right. It is right. 80% of those displaced are female. Women and children are also 14 times more likely to die in a climate disaster as compared to their male counterparts. More women died in the European heat wave of 2003. More women died in the 2004 tsunami in Asia. And women accounted for over 70% of the dead in parts of Indonesia and India. But why is this? Well, I saw some of you nodding when I talked about the underlying drivers and barriers there. Some of it is due to gendered social norms and mobility restrictions that mean women are at greater risk during disasters. So some of them face expectation barriers. And to be honest, it's kind of your instinct that if something bad is happening, you're going to grab your kids first. And then you'll probably go and grab your elderly mum and your elderly dad and get them out. You're not running for the door first and going, hey, fend for yourself, parent in a wheelchair. You're scooping them out, you're trying to get them out. So what we're seeing is societal expectations that women will put the elderly, they will put their children before they put themselves forward. And I kind of think that's right, but what it does mean is that it's killing women more than it is men. So, let's everybody go and pick up those kids and rescue them. But also very basic things like a limited freedom of movement, restrictive clothing, probably not had swimming lessons. I know some of that also applies to men as well, of course. A lack of confidence, perhaps, if you're socialised to stay within a small area and your life is conditioned. Although I was reminded the other day of, I now can't remember who was talking at an Oscars ceremony, and one of the female actors was saying, it's just that line in the disaster movie where the woman turns to the man and goes, oh, but what should I do now? And she said, have you ever seen a woman do that in a crisis? No, we just work out what needs to be done and get on with it. So ignore those disaster movies where the women are turning to the big man beside them going, but what should we do? We just get on with stuff. Exactly, thank you. As do men. This is not a man. This is, we all love men and women equally, but what the message I want to reinforce is that, yes, this impacts men, but it impacts women even more than the men. So what do we need to do about that? Well, just looking at the floods of Pakistan in 2022 and looking at the responses after that, typically it was the women who were giving up their income streams, whether that was through farming or smaller activities or helping neighbours out for money. They had to give up those additional income streams because they were expected to be the person who sorted out the fact that their home had now disappeared or had flood damage. They had to be the ones primarily picking up the pieces as their husbands went on to do other jobs. And of course, there's lots of families headed purely by women as well. Limited access to assets, financial services, and policy discussions, along with their caregiving responsibilities, meant they were more vulnerable to economic dislocation. And during the floods, the difficulty, and it is just harder to provide basic community services like policing and law enforcement in disaster situations. But again, it is women who are more vulnerable, not least the increased chances of sexual-based violence against them and longer-term domestic violence and abuse. This is a global challenge, by the way. There was a survey in Kenya in 2021 that found that domestic violence rose by 60% in areas that had been affected by climate and associated economic challenges. The 2002 floods in Pakistan also disrupted the water supply, as we know, and sanitation. So it's increasing the risk of waterborne diseases, lack of shelter due to heat stress, damage to healthcare provision. There were almost 650,000 pregnant Pakistani women who were deprived of healthcare during that period, as well as the lack of access for about 8 million women and girls to basic menstrual hygiene products and toilets to manage their period. So, the disaster is going on and you've just started your period. You're like, come on, what else can you throw at me? So again, what I say is the challenges are more acute for women. So what can we do? How do we bake these into policy responses and policy discussions? Well, first of all, be here today discussing it. So thank you for all coming and thank you for being part of a structural solution. But the first one, I think, is about making sure that women and girls are more involved in crisis preparedness and resilience. So before a crisis happens, how do you make sure that women are participating at national and community levels in the decision-making process? And as a brief anecdote, I'd only been in Pakistan, I think, about 2 months when I got the opportunity to go up to Hunza. And I was looking at some of the projects that our brilliant team at the British High Commission run on adaptation and mitigation up in the north. And I went to this sort of village hall and I sat down and, I'd had some frustrating conversations in Islamabad, to be honest, where I'd sort of come to some policymakers and said climate change, and they'd gone, look, we're very busy, come back later. I'd had sort of conversations at nice middle-class dinner parties, people didn't really want to talk about climate change, or there wasn't a high level awareness of what climate change was. And then I go to the north, and these people in remote villages sat around a table with me, and they were like, right, climate change is real. There's not enough snow on the mountain. This means the following 3 things for our livelihoods and agriculture. And they talked through climate change in detail at the micro level of what it meant for their communities. And after about 40 minutes, I said, look, it's been fantastic to hear from you, but I would really like to hear from some of the men in the room, because the women were dominating this meeting and the women had been talking through the local solutions and changes. But as I say, I'm inclusive, so I wanted to hear from the men as well. But that was just a wonderful moment for me early on in Pakistan, seeing the passion and community cohesion around some of those solutions. I've got a random example in here that I'm not quite sure how to work into this, but I'm going to give it you straight. So before agriculture industrialised, women farmers were known to have instinctively used regenerative agricultural practices. So these practices returned nutrients to the soil, built resilience within the soil, and increased soil fertility, all without chemicals. And since then, we've kind of moved with industrialisation to a world where industrialised agricultural companies are selling fertiliser. They are male-dominated. They are thinking about profits. They are not thinking about the future, unless there's a good CSR tagline in there for them, for some of them. But according to the UN, of course we love the UN, women can increase agricultural yields by 20 to 30% based on the same resources that the men have. Now, I'd love for us to go out this afternoon with the same resources and divide into the girls and the boys teams and see what grows at the end of this, but I think that's probably too long an experiment for us to be able to do here. But, of course, if you're growing 20 to 30% more food, you can also reduce hunger. That food will go further. So it's just, I think, sometimes about hearing different perspectives. Because actually, if you left it all to the women, maybe they wouldn't think of something that the men were coming in with. So it's got to be this stronger together gendered team. And we also see that the need to consider gender within climate change projects. So if they're not involved, it's just not going to be as effective. And I do very much welcome the Pakistani government's climate change gender action plan, which I know is designed to put women and girls at the front and centre of Pakistan climate change. I think we need to see a bit more of that implemented. It's great, like many things on the world, things can be great on paper. It's how we implement them, it's how we take them forward together that is really, really important. And the UK is trying to do quite a lot on reducing vulnerabilities and fostering sustainable, inclusive development within Pakistan. For example, our water management programme has been supporting women's decision-making in water use efficiency at the household and farm level. We know that sort of economic empowerment by women is also crucial to getting ahead of some of these climate shocks down the line, crucial to that kind of adaptation mitigation agenda. So in March 2023, for example, with Infra Zameen's assistance, the Cash Foundation issued Pakistan and South Asia's first gender bond, which we think will facilitate about 30,000 new loans for women-led businesses and small construction, so schools, homes, things like that, in areas hit by the devastating floods and creating around 50,000 new jobs. Our development finance institution, BII, has invested about $15 million in a credit line to Cash to provide specialised microcredit products and a capacity building service for micro entrepreneurs that focus again on women-owned or affiliated businesses. And through our special purpose vehicle, Karandars, our targeted investments have helped support over 600,000 jobs for women. And I'm always really torn when I see statistics like that, because on the one hand, I'm like, we helped get jobs to 600,000 women, that's amazing. And then I remember that the population of Pakistan is 240 million, and that's barely a footnote. But I think the lesson there is not don't do it. The lesson there is just you need an awful lot of these projects. Everyone needs to get behind it, and we need to scale up in order to have macro impact as well as micro impact. And that's why, to be honest with the team who are sat on the front bench here, we're developing a new climate finance programme, what we call CivPac, which is the Climate Investment Fund Pakistan, where we basically want to put in substantive chunks of money. It's about $140 million over the next couple of years to de-risk private sector investment. I know you've already done the climate financing session yesterday, but we are not going to get anywhere without private sector capital in this. So whether you're here as an activist or a consumer of goods or for the media, we've all got our roles to play in saying to those companies that we buy things from or maybe work for or that we lobby, you know, what are you doing on climate investment? What are you as a private sector company doing? Not just, I put some solar panels on my roof, aren't they pretty? What are you actually doing to make a difference here? So women, as we said, are front and centre of the effort to fight climate change. So let's involve all of us. So we need the men, we need the women, we need the kids, right? Kids have good ideas as well. Ask them about this stuff. And it's really hard. It's really difficult. You know, there are so many crises going off in the world right now. There's new announcements coming left, right, and centre that you're kind of like, what just happened there? What is a particular country doing? But I think this is the time now when we all need to band together to go, you know, these are such big issues. And it comes back to the old adage about how do you eat an elephant? How do you eat an elephant? How would you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You're a vegetarian, okay? That vegetarian answers are, how do you eat a really big aubergine? How do you eat an elephant? You eat an elephant one bite at a time. And that's what we've got to do here. We've got to eat quickly, because the elephant of climate change is big and growing, but by all of our individual contributions, by working together, by mainstreaming these gender issues, so men and women are working together on the solutions, that is how we are going to make a real difference, because it is not hopeless, and there are real things that we can do that impact our lives on a strategic and a micro basis. And I'm really looking to hearing more from the experts on your panel this afternoon, so thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Excellency, for the detailed speech. Indeed, the numbers are alarming when we speak about the devastating impact of climate change. But then you have also shared some interesting facts and data on how we can benefit from investing in women-led initiatives, and that is why it's really important. This discussion today is really important. But we must understand that, data is not an opinion. These are facts, and that is why it's really important that you have shared the data today. Let's continue the discussion with more insights to the work done at grassroots level, but also organizations and experts from the field. I'm going to introduce our panelists for today. I'm going to start with Tahira Abdullah. Tahira Abdullah is a renowned Pakistani human rights activist and development practitioner. For decades, Tahira has been at forefront of advocating for women's rights, human security, and social justice in Pakistan. Please, if you could join me in the stage. Wherever you like. Next, we have Jamshed Qazi. Jamshed Qazi is the country representative for UN Women Pakistan, a true ally of gender equality, with many years of experience working across the world with the UN agencies. You could please join us on stage. The only man on the panel discussion. It takes a lot of guts to be amongst such fierce, powerful women. Neha Mankani. Neha is a prominent Pakistani midwife and a public health practitioner. She is the founder of Mama Baby Fund. Neha was featured in the BBC 100 Inspiring and Influential Women list of 2023. Thank you for joining us. Next, we have on Nadia Jamil. Nadia Jamil is a celebrated Pakistani actress. We all know her, wellness expert, and a child protection activist. Thank you for joining us. Last but not the least, we have Hira Amjad, who is the founder of Dastak Foundation and Amplify Feminism Fund. Hira has dedicated herself to supporting women and girls impacted by climate change and conflict, working to empower and build resilience within marginalized community. Thank you all for joining us today, and we are going to get directly into the discussion. I'm going to start with Neha, you. Yeah, in an interview with AFP last year, you said that climate change does not affect everyone equally. You've witnessed firsthand the intersection of climate change and maternal health in climate disasters like the flood of 2022. I saw a picture of you traveling in boats to get to these areas. What specific challenges do women face in accessing reproductive health care services in these settings, and how can we better integrate these needs in disaster preparedness and response plans?
I think, thank you. So there are a couple of things. Thank you, Karishma, for that really important question. So I always talk about how climate is definitely not an equalizer. It does affect people very differently. So there are a few things. So one of the things that I had done with Mama Baby Fund, which is the organization that I founded, was that we worked on ground in the floods in 2022 in Sindh. And we worked specifically for pregnant women and young children. And what we saw was that women were affected in a very different way. So some of the things that we heard earlier in this panel was around mobility. They are able to move at a different pace when they have to evacuate. It's always with their children, with their animals. They're not able to get out as fast. But then also pregnant women, because that was the population we were looking at, were affected really badly. So they were displaced, which meant that they had completely lost all continuity of care in their pregnancy. So they had no place to give birth. We met women who were giving birth in the water. They were giving birth in tents. They were giving birth by the roadside because they had no access to healthcare. Nutrition is another really big one, that women, children are affected quite badly in these kind of situations. And then we also see things like gender-based violence. IDP camps, which is displacement camps, is, in my experience, one of the worst things that I've ever seen. Because when you've lost your community and you're living in an IDP camp, you've completely lost that sense of safety. And we were like one example that I'll give you is that we had met this woman who was in the camp. She was pregnant with twins, and we're doing this checkup, and we see that the fetal heartbeat is it's not very good. We think that she had malaria and she needed to get to a healthcare facility. So we said, okay, we've arranged an ambulance, we'll take you there. And she said that, you know what, I'm not going to go because I have nowhere to leave my other children. I don't know where the healthcare facilities that you're taking me. It was just a complete loss of community, which meant that she didn't go because she didn't feel safe. So there are a lot of these kind of things we saw. Roads that would take 10 minutes to get to a healthcare facility or to a market or anywhere had become like a 2-hour boat ride. So these were a lot of things we saw, but also we talk about climate in terms of extreme weather events. The community that I work in all the time is coastal community off of Karachi. It's an island. And we have a clinic there. And over there, we see this kind of unequal weather impacts every day. So heat is one of the things that I think it affects women very, very differently. Even something as simple as the way that they dress, which means that they can cool down much less than men. They're surrounded by water, but really can't be in it. And the other thing is that even things like in places like Karachi, which are urban heat islands, means that women are always indoors, they're not outdoors, so they can't cool down. And because of that unequal distribution, it means that it really affects them differently. So because of heat, we see a great increase in miscarriages, preterm births, we see a lot of respiratory issues, we see a lot of this in children as well. And the last thing I want to talk about is something that we see a lot in Punjab, which is smog. And I feel it's not spoken about enough how smog affects women differently as well. It really, because I look specifically at pregnant women, it really affects pregnancies. So yesterday in one of the sessions, someone had mentioned we're seeing a lot of babies now born with smoker's lung because it affects them in utero, but also lots and lots of pregnancy loss, preterm birth, brain and heart issues, and all of this is because something that smog, which is like an everyday thing for us. A little bit of what we're seeing, but we can expand further.
No, absolutely. And that's why I think also human stories are really important in the way you're sharing about, the women that you work with and the kind of challenges. And this is sometimes, it's good to be on stage and listen to policymakers and big speeches, but it's really essential to hear the situation at grassroots of what is happening. And as you touched on, gender-based violence, I'd love to take my next question to Tahira. Tahira ji, मुझे ये बता दें कि through your work, you have highlighted, the disproportionate impact of climate change on women and girls again, and especially in underserved rural communities. I want to understand, from your perspective and experience, how does climate change impact women and girls? And is there a link between GBV and climate change?
Thank you, Krishna. Hello, Assalamu alaikum, namaste, and good afternoon. And before I start answering the question, I'd just like to say it's unbelievable that so many of you chose to come to this alternate session as opposed to the star-studded galaxy happening downstairs, the media session. So a very, very, very big thank you, all of you. Especially, we women tend to take each other for granted. Huma's nodding her head vigorously there, and so is Nusi. So one would have expected that maybe 5 or 10 women would have sacrificed the media session downstairs and would have come here. But to see so many gentlemen here is fabulous. So apne liye taali bajaye. Thank you. I will answer the question about GBV and climate change and women. But before that, we heard data from Her Excellency, the High Commissioner, and what is happening with your work, especially in disaster relief and reconstruction and rehab. But I'd like to take a step back, if I may. End my invisibility. I want to end my invisibility. And I think that is where we need to start. Data is there. The data experts are sitting at the back and nodding their heads vigorously. We are Pakistani women. No, we are not 52% of the population. No, we are not 51% of the population. No, we are not 50% of the population. We are 48.9% of Pakistan's 250 million under-enumerated population. Which means that before we can talk about the intricacies and complexities of climate change, and before we can get into GBV, gender-based violence and violence against women, girls, transgenders, women living with difficulties and disabilities, differently abled women, and all women and children and all genders living in especially difficult circumstances. I'd just like to say that are we recognized as human beings also? These are difficult questions. They are bitter questions, but they need to be asked. And I'm asking them. Women, girls, transgenders, etc., men, all genders, have been fighting climate change, not since it became fashionable with the Paris Accords in 2016, or the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change in the 2000s. And I know many of you are too young to remember, but I remember Rio de Janeiro, the UNCED conference, the UN Conference on Environment and Development in 1992, Rio de Janeiro, when I first got involved with environment and climate change and global warming and all the rest of it. Why am I mentioning all this? Because Pakistan attends all these conferences, signs, ratifies all the UN conventions and the treaties, and pretends to enact legislation called the Environmental Protection Act of 1997, sets up an authority called the Environment Protection Agency, which is also 1997, if memory serves. I'm growing old, so if someone can correct me if I go wrong, please do that. 1997. And set up something called, I promise you I'm coming to GBV, I promise, I haven't forgotten GBV. And sets up something called Environmental Impact Assessment, But I want to know why. Why we have signed, Pakistan has signed onto the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals 2015 to 2030. I want to know where the linkages are. The question I have been asked is about gender-based violence and violence against women and girls. And my question is, where is the linkage of goal number 5? Those of you who are working on SDGs know exactly what goal number 5 is, with the rest of the 16 goals. In Urdu, we say Zanana Dabba. I refuse to be shut up in the women's segregated box. You know, this is not a cattle train and I'm not a cow. So I will not be in the Zanana Dabba, and don't anyone dare to put us in the Zanana Dabba. We will be integrated in all these sustainable development goals, many of which deal with climate change, environment conservation, and related issues. Many of them. Just go through this list. It's fascinating. But no, we are segregated in goal number 5, gender equality. And likewise, education is segregated and health is segregated. I know you're shaking your head, but it needs to be said again and again and again and again, reiterated, that we need integration and mainstreaming of women's issues, girls' issues, transgenders' issues, people living with disabilities, differently abled people, need to be integrated and included and mainstreamed everywhere. As regards gender-based violence, because that was the question, the first question, there's a lot more to be said on women and climate change, but extreme events have always led to an increased quantum as well as intensity and extensity of gender-based violence. During COVID, for example. Now, what does that have to do with climate change? A lot, but that's not the subject today, we won't get into it. We saw in the 2010 floods, some of us don't just remember the 2022 floods, we remember the 2010 floods also, and the 2011 floods. Thank you. I was a student then, but a volunteer pro bono worker for that also. I remember that very well. In fact, chutti mil gayi thi. We were no longer students at that time. We were on volunteer work leave. So I'm not going to get into this because everything, we talk about data. There is so much available. And for those of us who are old enough to remember something called paper, P-A-P-E-R, paper, so towards integration of Pakistani women's decent livelihoods and work in 2010 floods rehabilitation. I wrote this in 2010 with 7 pages of recommendations. And why am I sad to report this? Thank you. Yes, those 7 pages of recommendations, disaggregated recommendations, are still topical today. They are still valid today, and they are still badly needed today. Likewise, I just showed it to our friend from DAI here. Women and girls in humanitarian conflict-related emergency situations. 2 minutes, 1 minute, okay. We wrote this, Nahid and I wrote this in 2010. Nahid Khala to you. And it's still not implemented. It's a gender disaggregated, sex disaggregated assessment of what has gone wrong in climate change and extreme events and disasters and conflicts. Let us not forget the IDPs from North Waziristan who trekked down wearing their heavy velvet suits from the mountains, from the cold mountains of North Waziristan in June of 2014 to the hot plains of Bannu. and millions trekked down. Pregnant women were giving birth on the roads, mountain paths and roads, and dying along the way. The maternal mortality ratio and the infant mortality rate was a steep, sharp rise. But what was done about it? So I don't want to, again, this was published in the Legislative Watch newsletter, you remember that. 2010, it says, women flood affectees, issues and challenges. You might be interested in this. 2010, did you know, you're talking about gender-based violence, 34,000, 34,000, 3 zeros after 34. Public sector health workers, paramedical staff went missing. Ghaib. Missing. And people like us were saying, researchers, activists, development workers, CSOs, NGOs, etc., academics. So what happened to these women? Hame kya pata? For those who don't, what do we know about it? How should we know? There was a flood. It was a devastating flood. So, yes, women are impacted more to the tune of 34,000. I didn't hear of a single, I'm not here for male bashing. Please understand that. We love you all. But when we see the differential in impact, it not only is a scandal, it's an outrage, it's an atrocity, and it does not only make our blood boil, it makes us want to sob. It makes me want to cry even today after 2010. 15 years down the road, I want to burst into tears. A lot has been, will I get a chance to come to recommendations or not?
Yes, please.
Okay, all right, because I have some
I'm
more recommendations than the 7 pages.
We would love to hear from you all day long. It's just that we have time constraint. And you speak beautifully about a lot of things, and you also give rise to a lot of new questions, especially even for myself that I didn't have for the longest time. It's like, why are we put into one box in the SDGs? And why are we meant to be saved in the rest of the SDGs? Why can we not lead? It's a very interesting question that we must take from here today. I'd like to change the conversation a bit, and Jamshed, take the next question towards you. You have a vast experience of course, working with different countries within Asia, but also across the world. What are some of the most promising opportunities of investing in women and girls to address climate change, and do you have some examples that we could learn from it?
Sure, thank you very much. This is an awkward position. Let me try to move a little bit. There we go. So, first of all, let me just say how, thank you, how humbling it is to be in the presence of such experienced and distinguished women on the panel. It's somewhat intimidating, to be honest. Also, I think Her Excellency, the High Commissioner, took away a good half of my talking points in her opening, which is a good thing because it means I can actually try to filter a little bit more and be more specific. But I'll also say that I'm really pleased to be here for a variety of reasons, not just because I represent UN Women, but also if I can make it a more personal note. My first foray into international development has been environment. And in fact, one of my first jobs out of graduate school was in Karachi. I'm from Bangladesh, by the way, in case it doesn't appear apparent, probably doesn't. We all look very similar. And in fact, in Karachi, much of my work was around the mangrove and the wetlands. So, of course, during those days, it was mostly I came from a very strong environmental perspective. I didn't have that gender lens. I look back at all the things that I experienced, and I think over time, now bringing the two elements together, I think it's very sort of instructive. It's very illustrative. and again, this has been said before, but it is true that, 4 out of 5 of those who are displaced due to any extreme weather events, 4 out of 5 are either women and children. Women are also 14 times more likely to perish or lose their lives during extreme events. And it has a number of reasons. High Commissioner mentioned a few, but also, some things which also during, I was previously posted to Indonesia, where also there was, we learned during the tsunami, Aceh, other extreme flood events, sort of some of the same things. It's a predominantly Muslim country. So you had situations where when women were clearly trying to hold on for dear life under flood situations, you would see men in the vicinity, but not extending their arms or hands, because again, it was this whole issue of, if you're a nahmehram or you're somebody who's a man not from within the family, this is something which would be objectionable. So the casualty is, in a sense, preferred out of some sense of cultural, restrictions. And that was, it was quite bizarre. So one of the things I think we also, in the region, in terms of policy advice, is to ensure that at the local community level, women also are trained in disaster planning. So not that they just sort of stay at home as they tend to do, and as the High Commissioner said, what do we do next? And that's not what we want to leave our women and girls. And indeed, they know, but oftentimes we have to also ensure that they do have they are given the training, and they actually, within their communities, which are vulnerable, they know where is the higher ground, what are some of the signals, so what are the warnings, and something that is very, very simple, but often not done. So that's one sort of example I can provide. Also, I think the other example I want to say is women's leadership in all sectors is very important. So if we look at Asia, or even if we look globally, the number of women in positions of ministries or heading ministries of climate or environment is really very low. So within the ASEAN region, in Southeast Asia, only 6% or 7% of ministers of climate and environment are women. I think Pakistan has had a woman minister of climate change, so I think at least that's a good thing. And I believe during her tenure, there has been some very, very important developments, including the introduction of the loss and damage clause, during the COP discussion. So it does goes to show that where you do have and invest in leadership at various levels, women's leadership, that can make a very important contribution. I will go back in time again. I've been around for a while, and I also remember the 1992 Rio conventions. But just by way of example, and I have many other examples, but I wanted to put a personal touch to it. And again, to also state that the issue of climate change is nothing new. It has only garnered that kind of attention in the media now, but it's been at least going on for decades. So one of the examples I want to share is, in the neighboring country, India, there is a very interesting NGO that's called the Barefoot College. And back in 2003, when I was assigned to Ethiopia with UNDP, internet was terribly slow, so we couldn't find, there was no such thing as ChatGPT. So you had to try to find what are good examples. So I remember managing to take a group of Ethiopian women from the most rural, disadvantaged communities all the way to this village in Rajasthan in India. And what was fascinating to me is even back then, 20 plus years ago, there were women who didn't know how to read and write, and they were trained to fabricate solar cookers, to solar panels, that they then took back and assembled in their communities, and they were called the Barefoot Women Solar Engineers in Ethiopia. And suddenly, all of a sudden, these were women who never had any sort of respect in the village. They were not considered to be, listened to, and suddenly they were bringing light to the entire village, and that then led to decreased child mortality, because now you had light, you had midwives who were able to, better deal with deliveries and the like. So it had a real multiplier effect. So I think basically what I will just end by is saying that women need to be very much active in the arena of climate change, but also renewable energy. And so I also see that when we have policies around, and it could be policies on urban transport, renewable energy, other sectors, as Tahra Abdullah mentioned, that it's not just that SDG 5 box. Other sectors within the Sustainable Development Goals need women's leadership, and that will also have a positive impact on mitigating against climate. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your experience in this. And then I would, of course, directly also take this to Hira. And while I had a different question, but now that Jamshed speaks about the Ethiopian women and their knowledge, I want to understand, Hira, I know the important work that you do within communities like mine. I'm aware of it. But can you describe that the gender-specific need in intersectional themes or areas that have emerged during your work with climate refugees, especially women and girls at Grassroots? I also want to add to it, of course, with the statement that the examples that Jamshed shared, of why is it important then to contextualize or localize the work and develop indigenous knowledge in addressing climate change?
Thank you, Karishma. That's a lot to add into one question. But first of all, thank you so much for having me here. So as a neurodivergent, I was really happy that it was happening in a small room, but I, at the same time, feel the need to raise this, that this conversation should be happening as a general session because it's a very important subject. And when we talk about things that what we must do, what we should do, we also need to think about what can be done differently. What is it that we are doing wrong? What is it that we need to approach with a different lens, with a gender-inclusive lens? I'm just gonna, with due respect to everybody, just wanna take you all back to the video that we just saw at the start. So there was this woman, she was holding these placards and then she was throwing that paper into the water. So I just wanna look at the visual side of it, what kind of messaging we are sending across. And then she is holding these placards which have like a message, like statistics, but I'm sure she has a voice, she has a story. And wouldn't it be beautiful if we would give them the opportunity, a chance to showcase what are their needs, what are they actually going through. So that is what we are trying to break through the platform of Dastak Foundation, the organization that I founded a couple of years ago. We are humanizing the conflicts, the climate crises, the challenges that the communities are experiencing at the grassroots level. I wish we had more time, but Neha, Tahira Apa, all of you have beautifully explained the challenges that are happening on the ground. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on the solutions. So when we are gathering these stories, obviously I'm from Rawalpindi and I'm living in an urban center. But when we go to the rural communities, they already have the solutions. They just need the direction, the right kind of the platform, the space where they can come together, they can brainstorm. Along the way in our journey, we have identified and come across a women village bank. So it's just a small setup in which women, like there is a committee system in Pakistan. So what they're trying to do is, they're trying to gather money for the climate impacted households. And they have made up this system that is recirculating the money within the community. Similarly, during the floods, we came across another seamstress who was stitching cloth pads and was redistributing them up and down the upper Chitral belt. So the belt that I'm talking about right now, like for instance, just imagine that we are in Buni right now, and you have to travel at least 17 to 18 hours to reach the last village, which is below Prohil. So there is no internet, no telecommunication. The only way you can communicate with each other is you have to find the spot where there can be a signal, or you communicate through the public transport, like the drivers who go up and down, you tell them this is what you need. So that is how they were redistributing menstrual pads up and down that belt during the floods. So such initiatives, such interventions need to be picked up and localized further. Going back to the question of Karishma in terms of localizing the indigenous knowledge, one other need that we identified during our work was developing reproductive health structures by engaging the midwives on the ground. We trained them in humanitarian action because they are from far-flung villages. So, and then we are doing this work in collaboration with Neha in that community. So I just also want to bring forward the aspect of cross-sectoral collaboration here. This work cannot be done in isolation. We have to come together, we have to pool in our resources, and we have to work together. Lastly, just one more point that I want to add here is Her Excellency spoke about the Gender Action Plan. It's an amazing document in terms of having a roadmap. So what we are doing through Dastak is we are developing district-level gender action plans for different district disaster management authorities. And I just want to bring one story to the table. When we were working with the government officers and when we were having these conversations, one of them very blatantly said to me, we can't hire women because then they have to go on maternal leaves or they don't work after 12. So there is a strong need to bring them into the spaces where we can do the capacity bridging with them. And trust me, we can bring them around and we can have this conversation with them. But the first step is to at least reach out to them and have this conversation around gender with them. So I think instead of transporting policies, solutions from urban to rural centers, let's go to the communities, ask them what their needs are and how we can build upon the existing work, existing knowledge, existing wisdom that is within the community. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hira. You've stated the problem, but also given us important solution. And I think one thing that particularly stands out for me is collaboration. There has to be a lot of collaboration, and we can only do so much individually as organizations, as individuals, and that is why for a matter of climate change that affects everyone, we must focus on on a collaborative way forward. Nadia, we spoke a lot about grassroots level work, indigenous communities, and rural areas. I want to take the question towards you now, also specifically to point out that children are also impacted by climate change. Children are impacted by climate change, and also in urban areas. We don't speak about that enough. And I want you to share more on how children are affected by climate change in the urban areas in that context. But one important thing that we also forget is mental health and how this affects for children, people in general, and we don't discuss about it enough.
Assalamu alaikum, namaste, hello. So, thank you, Krishna, for the question, and thank you, everybody, for the incredibly enlightening and inspirational messages and talks that I've been hearing. I'm wearing red today to underline how critical the emergency of climate change is. It is critical. It is not just a Pakistani issue or a South Asian issue. Climate does not need a visa. It does not need a passport, and it has no boundaries. Climate affects topography. It affects children. It affects men and women. It affects animals. It affects wildlife. It affects trees and plants. It affects food and water. So we are already way beyond where we should have been, and in the extreme danger zone when it comes to climate. And yet, we are so blissfully unaware, and we continue to live in our little bubbles, and then these bubbles burst. We have seen these bubbles bursting in rural areas. We have seen it in the form of floods. But recently, I work with children and I'm a mental health expert. I've been working with children for over 30 years. 30 साल से ऊपर मैं बच्चों के साथ काम कर रही हूँ. मैं ऐसे बच्चों के साथ काम करती हूँ. I work with children who are severely traumatized. They have suffered abuse, they have suffered premature birth, they are sometimes born with addictions, they have suffered sexual abuse, sometimes even as early as the age of 3 days old, and they die. And now I'm watching the effects of pollution on the parents and the children. And it is crippling. It is crippling. I'm going to focus a little bit on the smog in Punjab, and over 11 million children under the age of 5 in Punjab have been exposed recently to toxic air. Young children are particularly vulnerable. They have small lungs and really vulnerable immune systems. They are developing respiratory diseases. They are developing potential long-term cognitive impairments. मैं बाद में आऊँगी on the mental health issues that are arising amongst children and adults. You know, when a child gets sick, the women are affected. When the mothers get sick, the child is affected. So it is the mother and the child, it's a symbiosis. You cannot separate them. It's, there have been educational disruptions, schools have closed down, parks have closed down, gardens, or Sahan mein bhi bache, they cannot go outside. Bilkul, it was strictly because the air pollution levels were so toxic and so high that everybody was keeping themselves and the children indoors. Most of the population cannot afford the air filters that a lot of us are using. I think we should have an effective drive to donate air filters, seriously, especially the locally made ones. 26 million students were affected by the smog in Punjab. 26 million students. This not only hampered their educational progress, it limited their physical activities, essential for their overall development, and it also affected the environment in the home. In late 2024, a 30-day period, over 30 dinon ke andar, over 1.93 million individuals sought desperate medical attention for respiratory issues in Punjab. Then there have been reproductive issues. Now, there hormonal imbalances, increased fertility rates. There are pollutants called particulate matter hota hai, found in smog vehicles, in factory emissions, and in industrial pollution. Now, pregnancy complications hui hain. Pregnant women exposed to polluted air, higher risk of giving birth to premature babies. I work with the Punjab Protection Bureaus. I work with over 9 protection bureaus. We have had an increased rate of premature babies coming in who can barely breathe, and many do not survive. We have had an increased rate of babies coming in who are differently abled, cognitively and physically. And we have an increased rate when these babies come in who are premature, who are sick, who are differently abled, of abandonment, babies being abandoned. We have an increased rate of mothers getting so sick they cannot take care of their children, and so the bureau takes over. The husband marries another woman. Those children are more or less abandoned and taken over by the government and become wards of state. So we have an increased rate of endocrine disruptions. You know, pollutants and endocrine disrupting chemicals, they reduce the quality of eggs in women. So fertility issues are real in men and in women. I mean, we have a lot of young women in the room today, a lot of young men in the room today, all breathing this toxic air. Everybody's hormones are being affected. Everybody's lungs are being affected. Everybody's brains are being affected. Let's talk about mental health. If you cannot breathe, and if you have respiratory illnesses, and if you do not have oxygen in your head, and if you have a high toxic amount of pollutants and chemicals in your brain, in your heart, because you have a cardiac system and a cardiac brain as well, you have an enteric brain, your gut system is collapsing, your entire body is affected by these pollutants. So I am just focusing right now on the smog, and these are the problems and the issues. I have a small, brief, quick list of solutions.
If we can make it a little brief because we
Yes.
have about 5 minutes and we have to wrap up,
Absolutely.
so.
Firstly, reducing air pollution at source, regulating industrial emissions, promoting clean energy, of course, electric or CNG powered public transport, ban vehicles that are idling near schools and hospitals to reduce unnecessary emissions, health protection measures for women and children. Please, 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 बहुत ज़रूरी बात है. Let's all push to create clean air zones, CAZs. Clean air zones क्या होते हैं? Designated pollution-free zones around schools, hospitals, and residential areas. You limit or ban high-emission vehicles, diesel trucks, old cars. You implement low-emission electric vehicles and corridors. You increase pathways for people to walk. You increase cycle lanes. You improve healthcare access. Encourage walkability. Anti-idling laws. Yes, also please start fining. I think it is now so critical and so, the emergency is so bad. I think we should have laws and policies in place that should start fining those people with 150 cars that are high emission and who are ignoring all of these details. Cross-border cooperation is so important. We need to work with Bangladesh, India, China, Afghanistan, Iran. We need to work across the border because we are sharing the same air. We are sharing the same problems. You know, India has now Delhi has started a certain hour where only certain areas only low emission vehicles can go in. अगर आपकी गाड़ी या डीजल ट्रक पोल्यूट करता है, आ ही नहीं सकता इस वक्त वो इस एरिया में. China has started areas where they have excess amounts of growth and forestry so that those plants absorb a lot of these chemicals. Let's learn. Finally, women-led environmental movements. School-based air quality programs. If we start teaching our children from primary school how critical this is, they will be the leaders tomorrow who will be coming up with better solutions than we have been doing. Tax benefits, please, to businesses adopting clean energy sources, CSR companies funding clean air projects, pollution fines, public-private partnerships, and bringing green buffer zones, like forest buffers, all around in every city. You know, it's really now or never for us. Bulle Shah ne kaha hai, माली दाकम पानी देना पर मशका पावे, मालिक दाकम फल फूल लावना लावे या ना लावे. It is the gardener's job to keep watering. Then see what results happen or don't happen. But we aren't even watering. We aren't doing what we need to do. We aren't saying what we need to say. And I met recently a fantastic, this is my last line, a fantastic visually challenged young man who said to me, you know who the really disabled people are, Nadia Baji? The really disabled people are those people who see everything and don't do anything about it, who hear everything and don't say anything about it. Those people are disabled. Why are they using that tagline for us? So I request all of us to stop being disabled.
Thank you very much, Nadia. So we have been given an extension, thankfully, and that just shows that our conversation is actually really interactive, very informative, and everyone is pretty involved. So that just means that we will have a shorter tea break. I hope everyone agrees to that. Thank God, because I had some really questions that I really wanted to ask. But my one question for everyone would be, what can we do better to center the voices of women and girls in policy making, starting from Tahira Sahiba? What can we better do?
Very quickly. The National Policy for Development and Empowerment of Women has been coming out since 1984. Some of us weren't even born then, I was. And it's been tinkered with little bits and pieces around the edges. This particular one that I just happened to bring is 2002. Nabila would give us a lot more than that. But the point here is, why is climate change, environment, disaster, risk reduction and management missing? We can see the linkages, we see the nexus, we see the imperative. Why do the policymakers not see it? Along with the policymakers, in 2002, some of you may remember Advocate Shahla Zia, one of the founders of AGHS with Asma Jahangir, wrote Manifesto Suggestions for Women Empowerment for Political Parties. 2002 was followed by 2012. And then I followed it up with Election Manifesto Suggestions on Women's Empowerment in 2023. And each time we said, where is environment, climate change, global warming, disasters, conflicts, wars? All these are linked to women's empowerment or the lack thereof. So someone needs to sit up and take note. And I'm sick of hearing election manifesto saying, सबसे माजरत के साथ पेश की माजरत के साथ हमारा manifesto takes into account, is based on the fact that Pakistan is based on Islamic religion and culture. Excuse me, I am based on 9,000 years of culture and civilization. I became a Muslim only 1400 years ago. And I became a Pakistani only 77 years ago. मुझे मत बताओ कि मैंने क्या करना है मजहब के बारे में. मुझे अपने कल्चर से, अपने सिविलाइजेशन से, अपने मुआशरे से, मैं रूटेड हूं उसके अंदर. I want to know where my rights are, where gender justice equals climate justice equals gender equality. That is what we want from your manifestos and nothing else. And we need to go back to what Najma Sadiq wrote, Ground Realities, the nexus between women and climate and the environment. She wrote this way back in the 1980s and 1990s. Some of us remember her, Nabila, yes. Lekin, why are we cutting down so many trees? And now in cyberspace, with all these research reports, data, recommendations, the way forward, मातम तो बहुत हो गया, करना क्या है? हमें पता है कि हमने करना क्या है. All we need, and this is my last word, is the political will and the political commitment. बहुत शुक्रिया.
My question is also directed towards our other panelists, if you want to add to what Tahira Abdullah Saiba has said. So starting with you, Neha.
Thank you. So I would agree with everything that was said. And then also just, when we talk about representation and listening to women, just actually do it versus, when we have policies and we pat ourselves on the back because we think that we've accomplished a lot. There's just so much that can happen. I'll give you an example of even emergency response and how we think that we're listening, but we're not. So one example is we would go out in the work that we did. We went to around 23 villages, and half of the places we went, the Navy would come. They would give us these really large cartons of sanitary pads with wings and everything, and they would say, look, they've come here. Not one person wants them. Please, can you deal with them? The women weren't using them, right? But that was just some imagined solution that someone had come up with, that this is the product, this always is what the women in the community need because they're menstruating and they don't have anything. But Hira presented a solution which made so much sense. So if you're actually listening to what it is that people want, I feel like the solutions will come up. And another thing about indigenous knowledge, which I think is so interesting, is that when we're in these IDP camps, people had left their homes with, the 5 things that they needed the most. One of those things for anyone who had it was a solar panel. So everyone had grabbed their solar panel and they had taken it. And it just really makes us think that people know what the solutions are. So why are we not listening to them when we present those solutions? So that, and then because we speak about women and girls, I think also a really important solution is just a system strengthening, whether that's educational or protection or health systems. Like most of the challenges we saw were because our health system was so weak that it couldn't manage any shocks. Like one shock and it's all gone. So if we invest in system strengthening, maybe we will be able to bear some more disasters because they will come to us. So that's
Absolutely, thank you. And it is really important to listen to women to start with, and that is the bare minimum. And that brings me to Nadia. I know that you really, you're passionate about, climate change and the solutions, and you really want to share. Just briefly in 2 minutes, what are the key challenges and just quickly the solutions to the problems?
Yeah, perfect. So, when there's a crisis, when your house is burning, right, and you've got to get out of there, you're not going to stand there and start in the fire complaining कि देखो जरा वो खड़ा हुआ है वहाँ पे, वो मेरी हेल्प नहीं कर रहा, वो देखो जरा वो सामान सामने. No, because you will burn down with that house so fast. This is not the time for pointing fingers on who's not doing the right thing. This is time to start urging more communities, more of us, hold hands, get together, and push each other to do the right thing. Also, I think complaints fall on deaf ears. This is historical. They fall on deaf ears. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about my complaint. Nobody cares about me complaining about the government or the political system. Nobody cares. And most of all, what am I doing? So I stopped using the word hope. Because I felt that hope, jo hai na, umeed, it is a very lazy kind of a vision. For me to sit down and hope that one day the world will be free of pollution and there will be a child protection system in Pakistan and there will be gender equality in the world. No. I am going to stop hoping and I'm going to start visualizing. I'm going to visualize it down to the T so I can see a clean earth. An earth where there is gender equality, where there is more compassion, kindness, where we take responsibility for ourselves and each other. A Pakistan where there is a child protection system. I'm going to imagine what does it sound like. I can hear those kids, healthy, happy, nurturing, all going to school above the age of 5, like our constitution says they should. I can watch them, I can see their healthy little bodies playing. And now, after I visualized it, I'm going to ask myself, what part am I playing in that? There are thousands of hands that are going to be planting the seed of a better future. Thousands of hands, thousands of compassionate hands. May one of them be mine. May one of them be yours. And may we connect, all of us. When I pledge as a mental health, I'm not a mental expert. I mean, I'm a little mental, but I'm a mental health expert. But I do pledge that any work that I do, any proficiency I have as a mental health practitioner who specifically works with children and women, I'm on board. Weak law enforcement. Problem hai na? Weak law enforcement. Okay, let's look at the solution. Let's stop looking at the problem. Strengthen penalties and deploy pollution control units. Let's push for that. I know 100 people who stop me and tell me, "Pehle apna sar dhako. Azan ho rahi hai, sar dhako." 100 people a minute will stop me if I have not put my dupatta on my head when there is an azan. May we have that same kind of passion for strengthening penalties and deploying pollution control units. May we have that same kind of passion for plastic, banning it. May we have that same kind of moral policing for littering and polluting the environment. Public resistance. That is the problem. Solution kya hai? Awareness campaigns and community engagement. And you and I are the community. We are the community. Problem kya hai? High cost of air purifiers. Okay, fine. Kya kar sakte hain? Subsidies, local manufacturing, CSR projects. Finally, problem kya hai? Industrial pushback. Solution kya hai? incentives for industries to adopt clean energy. If you are driving your car, riding your bicycle, or riding your horse on a narrow road up a mountain, and you keep looking in the khai, and the khai is all the problems, all the setbacks, all the issues, you will keep ending up in that khai. So my request is for us to turn our cars, our cycles, ourselves, our vision to where we want to be, to the solutions. And let's all start talking solutions and being part of the solution and visualizing it, and then visualizing what part am I playing in it.
Thank you very much, Navya. I take the question now, Hira, really quick because we have only a few minutes. If you could change one thing in the global conversation about gender and climate change, what would it be?
Okay, so finance, finance, and finance. There is a lot of conversation about what we can do, what we should do in the global space. And from the platform of the Dastak Foundation, we are trying to make the local global, trying to take stories from what's happening on the ground to global spaces where decisions are actually being made, where the money goes and how much it goes. And there was a new collective quantified goal as well, where there was no mention of gender, no mention of inclusivity, no mention of intersectionality. So what I want is younger people from Pakistan and from different countries who are going to these spaces, who are negotiating with different member states, different parties during the COP, during CSW, please talk about financing, talk about money, ask them to put their money behind where their speeches are. It's really important. Secondly, obviously, we also should be doing something at the same time. So we are also putting together Pakistan's first feminist fund with the name of Amplify Feminism Fund. So the goal of that fund is to bring in unrestricted feminist financing to grassroots solutions in Pakistan. And please put together more such initiatives because honestly, we can talk, we can strategize, we can come up with ideas, and there isn't much that we can do if we don't have the money. And our first grant was just $300 like a couple of years ago. So we just have to start from somewhere. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And lastly, with Jamshed, again, I would take you back to the first question is what can we better do to center the voices of women and girls and policymaking in Pakistan?
Thank you very much. I second all the recommendations that I've heard so far, but I actually want to come back to something I heard at the opening by the World Bank Climate Change Global Director, Valerie Hickey. And I think it's worth repeating here for those of you who might have missed it. And that is that when we speak of climate change, this is not an environmental problem, as she said, because the planet will be fine. We will not. The planet will survive whatever cycles of cyclical movements that happen. It's also not, as she said, a purely economic problem. Because, if we look at 70% of the 1.3 billion people who live in this planet are women. So at the end of the day, the problem boils down to what we're talking about. It is a problem of the poor, and it is a problem that affects women and girls disproportionately. So that's where the problem lies. Now, I think the solutions many have said, and I would say again that finance, absolutely, that cannot be understated, but also the importance of women occupying spaces of leadership where they currently are not. All these women on the panel with me are leaders in their own right. But I believe that there are so many other spaces which are not the gender box, the climate change box, which needs leadership of women, because issues such as air pollution cannot be sorted by any one conversation. You need to be involved in commerce, in transport, in construction, in energy, all these sectors. If you look at all the committees that we have in Pakistan, I would be very hard pressed to find even 5% of them women in any committee. And I go to many meetings and I see it. I also contribute to that in my own, because of who I am. But But I want to also say one more thing, and I'll say this is something that no one has mentioned yet. And this is, I mean, Nadia has mentioned the issue of personal agency, things we can do ourselves. But also, I think, and this is going to be very unpopular, so bear with me, Pakistan is a country where those who have the means love to eat red meat. I come from Bangladesh, it's not so much of an issue. Hame to dal chawal, machli, we're thrilled. But again, given the resource intensity of the amount of water and energy it takes to produce that 1 kilo of mutton or whatever else, it's something I think I would say, along with many other things, water use, vehicle use, not doing enough walking, and it's also good for health. I think your doctors will tell you that it will lower your cholesterol. So to the extent possible, I've tried, but being in Pakistan, it's not easy to stay away from meat. But I am saying that if you can try to cut it out once or twice from your routine in a week, that may actually go some distance. And so again, on that note, I hand it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, as we conclude today's discussion, I want to thank our esteemed panelists on their valuable insights into the issue of climate change. And I would like to end this with a powerful statement said by Tahiraji, and my visibility. We spoke about the women bank in the village of Chitral. We spoke about the female farmers. We spoke about the women in Ethiopia generating light for their community. It's just to prove that we are part of the community. And the urgency of climate change, it demands that we act collectively. This is not a gender issue. This is an issue for us all. And so I want us all to leave here today with a renewed commitment to integrate gender perspective in all the climate policies, your programs, and we need to empower women because we know that when we empower women, we empower communities. Thank you all for being here and for being part of this vital conversation. And I hope you all have a wonderful day.